all stories, his is one of the most influential. His birth gives structure to our age. His path guides the faith of billions of human beings. Jesus of Nazareth, a divine figure, crucified, then resurrected, fascinates as much as he challenges us. Who was this man who died on the cross at the age of 33?
One of the essential questions concerning Jesus is to know if he was a human being or divine.
And when you look at the humanity of Jesus, then you begin to consider things like the experiences that any of us face.
What do we know of his life? Did he ever have any relations with women, and in particular with the one so often depicted at his side, Mary Magdalene?
The question is, where is he kissing her? On her hand, on her feet as a mark of respect, or perhaps on her cheek, or even on the lips?
So, can God have sex? Well, this gets into a whole other discussion.
Could Christ have had a wife and even children? In the ancient depths of Israel, archaeological discoveries have shaken the very pillars of the church.
I think literally this is the biggest archaeology story of the century.
In the United States and England, formerly unknown papyri and ancient manuscripts have come to light that cast doubt on Christian beliefs.
There are two lines. One of them says, Jesus said to them, "My wife."
So all the evidence, the literature, the Gospels themselves, the archaeology, the historical writings, everything says Jesus was married.
Defended by scientists and historians, presented in the halls of academia, each of these revelations shakes the very foundations of the Catholic religion.
So in just two tiny lines, you're basically firing cannon shots at these central pillars of Catholic tradition: the exclusion of women from the priesthood and priestly celibacy.
If Jesus is really married to Mary Magdalene, it means that Christian churches have been hiding from the very beginning something really integral about his identity. Then the foundational doctrines of Christianity start to crumble.
Carefully examined, these writings recount antiquity and fascinating characters.
People just wanted documentaries about Jesus, films about Jesus, books about Jesus. Jesus has always been a big top seller.
Between fascination and suspicion,
You will just keep getting this coming back again and again because we love this stuff. We drink it up.
between scientific quarrels,
Anyone who wants to talk about Jesus and Mary Magdalene is fighting an uphill battle in the academy.
The only argument against the conclusions which I draw are theological.
and fake news in the media.
If it's a forgery, it's a career breaker.
What real proof is there that Jesus' family existed? The most famous man in history may not have told all. For 2,000 years, the New Testament has been the cornerstone of the Christian faith. Within it, the most important texts are the four Gospels, whose authorship is attributed to Jesus' closest apostles. While they give an account of his teachings, Christ's personality remains very mysterious.
The four Gospels of the New Testament never speak of Jesus' personal life.
We know absolutely nothing about Jesus' matrimonial status. There is no wife of Jesus that is mentioned. He has no girlfriends. There was no childhood romance that we know about. The New Testament does not mention any kind of wife for Jesus.
The fact that the Gospels don't say that Jesus was married doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't married. Some authorities say he most certainly was, because it was the norm back then. Everyone was married, including religious leaders. Rabbis were even expected, in a way, to set the example by having a wife and children.
In the first century, this was logical. Celibacy made no sense for men or women. It could only be justified while awaiting marriage. So it's unlikely that anything would prevent Jesus from having relations with a woman.
So the question has to be asked, Is he just a typical Jew who must have been married, or is he more like other religious leaders who were deliberately celibate because they saw themselves as kind of philosophical leaders?
Who was the man behind the legend? To understand, we have to go back to the 1st century of our era. In the north of what is today called Israel, in the region of Galilee, Jesus attracted many disciples. The man was at the center of numerous miracles, and he predicted the coming of God.
He's charming, he's charismatic, he's clearly very intelligent and articulate, according to the Gospels, and he attracts followers, sometimes a lot of followers.
Jesus mostly has men around him. He has 12 apostles, as well as other disciples, a very masculine milieu. But on closer examination, we can recognize a few women, particularly several who accompany him closely and who even finance his public preaching. And one of them is even more visible than all the others. Her name is Mary, more precisely, Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene. The mere mention of her name stirs passions. But what do the Gospels tell us about her? Single and independent, the native of Galilee is a key character, often depicted at the side of the man from Nazareth. Their relationship is intriguing.
The more time passes, the more Mary Magdalene is present, particularly during more intimate moments with Jesus, the moments when his death is approaching.
When the other disciples have fled, she is among the women weeping at the feet of the crucified Jesus. 3 days later, she is one of the witnesses who discover the disappearance of her master's body.
The key event in the entire gospel is the death and resurrection of Christ. And who witnesses the resurrection of Christ? A woman, Mary Magdalene. That's why Mary Magdalene is called the apostle to the apostles. It's she who will announce to the apostles that Christ has resurrected. Seen in that perspective, she plays a unique part, a key role.
That's the most important point, because in those days, a woman could not bear witness. Her testimony was invalid.
That means for a few brief moments, she's the entirety of the church. That's it. That's Mary Magdalene.
This tale might conceal the story of a privileged relationship between a man and a woman. If only because of the importance of her proximity to Jesus, Mary Magdalene disturbs us. Could her essential role have been minimized so much that it disappeared? Her image would undergo a profound transformation. 6th century AD. At the summit of the church, Pope Gregory the Great rewrites history. Mary Magdalene is one of his first victims.
Gregory the Great executes a sleight of hand that's in fact a theological power play by merging two women appearing in the Gospel of Luke. The sinner who goes to Simon the Pharisees and anoints Jesus with expensive perfume, and Jesus' friend, Mary of Magdala.
On one hand, Jesus' close friend called Mary of Bethany. On the other, an anonymous woman who sensually wipes Christ's feet with her hair. This fusion gave birth to the image of a new, darker Mary Magdalene. Now she is a temptress, carrying within her the weight of sin.
So he merged two women, choosing not to favor Jesus' friend, the native of Magdala, but the sinner, in order to denigrate the female body and show that ever since Eve, women are dangerous.
He couldn't foresee, however, the development of archaeology in the 19th century. This revealed manuscripts from the depths of the Egyptian desert and the shelves of forgotten monastic libraries. They would cast the relationship of Mary Magdalene and Jesus in a completely different light. These texts, dating from the first centuries after Jesus, were produced in the Gnostic religious community, a mystical tradition of Christianity. In them, a more human Jesus is portrayed. Curiously, the Church did not integrate these writings.
The Gospels that were excluded from the Bible are called apocrypha. The word's root signify hidden, secret.
Had these writings been forgotten or marginalized over the course of centuries? Or did the Catholic Church deliberately seek to conceal sensitive information?
Starting in approximately the 4th century, it became clear that religious authorities wanted to tidy things up, particularly by eliminating the Apocrypha. This was obviously because of the high stakes related to dogma and the doctrine of the faith. It's evident that the Church wanted nothing to do with these traditions.
These apocryphal Gospels contain previously unseen information. One of them, discovered in 1896, entitled The Gospel of Mary, presents Mary Magdalene as an example.
The Gospel of Mary, which can be dated to the 2nd century and of which several copies were found in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, portrays a woman who is Jesus' closest disciple, whom he trusts completely, and to whom he revealed secrets he kept from the other disciples.
In just a few words, Mary Magdalene became the person who passed on the teachings of Jesus to the other disciples.
Peter is wild with jealousy when he says, "What? The Lord has told things to a woman that he did not tell to us?" And his friends reply, "But he's the Lord. He talks to whomever he wants."
If this manuscript reveals the privileged bonds that existed between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, another more clearly alludes to the nature of their relationship. The Gospel of Philip was discovered 50 years later, 80 kilometers from Luxor, Egypt, near the village of Nag Hammadi, among a trove of 12 ancient codices. More than a friendship between Jesus and his disciple, a physical relationship is described.
In the apocryphal Gospel of Philip, there is a passage in which Peter complains that Jesus is frequently kissing Mary Magdalene.
And the question is, where is he kissing her? On her hand, on her feet, as a mark of respect, as recognizing her important status, or perhaps on her cheek, or even on the lips. And if it's on the lips, then suddenly the relationship looks a little bit different.
A person in the 21st century would say, "Oh yeah, so they're a couple, they're dating, right?"
While some might see a real kiss, specialists mostly view this as a spiritual symbol.
The kissing in the Gospel of Philip does not necessarily mean that they are in a married relationship or a sexual relationship. This could simply be like the early Christian kisses that we know about, where people were greeting one another. As much as some people do in some cultures today, a kiss does not necessarily have to be sexualized.
Because she's the most favored disciple, and because she's the closest to Jesus, they must be sleeping together. Why can't she just be the best disciple? They aren't evidence of what happened in the 1st century. When it comes to Mary Magdalene, what these texts are evidence of is the role that women were playing in this period in the church.
Apocryphal writings versus official writings. The part played by Mary Magdalene has always raised questions. This mystery and the public's fascination with it would grow with the worldwide success of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code, for people who haven't read it, for maybe the 2 people who haven't read it, tells the story of a Harvard professor of religion who discovers a conspiracy by the Catholic Church to bury evidence of Jesus' marriage and child with Mary Magdalene.
Stoked by the media, this fascination would erase the border between fiction and reality. In 2012, a new discovery would intensify the debate. Coming from one of the most prestigious universities in the world, its contents could so shake up the church, it might topple. Rome, September 18th. Sapienza University of Rome is buzzing. A conference has brought together the most renowned scholars to attend the lecture of their colleague, the eminent Harvard historian Karen Lee King, who has an essential revelation to share.
You have On one side of Via Sesto 6, the street separating the Vatican from this conference site, on one side of it, you have a representative of Harvard, right? The richest and most powerful university in the world. And on the other side, you have the seat of the Catholic Church, the richest and most powerful religious institution in the world. They're right across the street from each other. And in about 30 minutes, Karen King is going to essentially drop a bomb on their doorstep.
The Gospel of Jesus' Wife. This hitherto unknown manuscript dating from the 4th century is revolutionary.
8 lines on the front, 6 lines on the back. The most exciting line in the whole fragment, however, is the sentence, Jesus said to them, to his disciples that is, Jesus said to them, my wife.
It's about the size of a business card, right? It's like this big. There are 2 lines. One of them says, Jesus said to them, my wife. The next line is, she is able to be my disciple.
These words might settle the question of Jesus' celibacy. However, they don't permit the affirmation that they refer to Mary Magdalene.
So in just 2 tiny lines, you're basically firing cannon shots at these central pillars of Catholic tradition, the exclusion of women from the priesthood and priestly celibacy.
Karen King never said this was proof that Jesus was married. She said this was proof that people were talking about it. And to her, that was evidence of people using the idea of a married Jesus and using the idea of Mary Magdalene to think about women's authority.
Jesus' marital life and his sexuality were already subjects of thought among ancient Christians. 2,000 years later, they remain burning questions.
Anyone who wants to talk about Jesus and Mary Magdalene is fighting an uphill battle. And so immediately when Karen King announces this fragment, people start lodging their objections.
The subject excites people and disturbs them. The unusual aspect of the document also raises numerous questions.
It looked really strange. I still remember my reaction when I first looked at it, and I thought, my goodness, that's ugly. The writing on it is it's thicker. The letters are thicker than you'll see in other comparable documents. So that straight away was, what am I looking at? That was really strange.
When you look at the papyrus fragment, it's clumsy. It's messy. It almost looks like it's written in bold in certain parts, and it has grammatical mistakes in it and typos. When you look at this, this is an ugly document.
Scientists immediately questioned the papyrus's authenticity.
If it's a forgery, it's a career breaker. One of the things that's worth remembering is that Karen King is already at the very top of her field. She is at Harvard University, the most famous university in the world. She has, for one, climbed a very male-dominated field of biblical studies.
You're now at the Harvard Divinity School. You're the Hollis Professor of Divinity. Are you the first woman since 1721 to hold that?
I am.
Why did it take so long for a woman to hold that chair?
It has to do very much with the history of women's roles in this country and in education.
She's well known as a feminist scholar, and she's one of the world's leading authorities in Gnosticism, which was this sort of group of Christians in the early church.
She has really nothing to gain from taking this risky discovery and putting it before the public. But intellectually, I think this piece of papyrus was really important for her. She had devoted her career to recovering the lost voices of women in early Christianity.
At 58, this recognized specialist knows the presentation of this manuscript will provoke a tsunami in the Catholic Church, especially if it's entitled The Gospel of Jesus' Wife. It must be irrefutable.
Karen King did take precautions. She spoke to 2 of the finest papyrologists in the world, exactly the people I would turn to if I was trying to publish a fragment like this.
For the papyrologists Anne-Marie Lewandijk and Roger Bagnall, the document is authentic. A few minutes after the specialist's revelation, Harvard released the news, which was immediately relayed by media around the globe.
And it becomes this media sensation. So I'm still in Rome. I'm the only journalist in the room. On the night she presents it to colleagues, but by the next day, I'm not the only journalist, because by the next day, reporters, camera crews are descending on the conference site, trying to find Karen King, trying to learn more.
She named it The Gospel of Jesus' Wife. And so when you announce that to the media, the headline is always going to be, Jesus was married. It's never going to be, scholar discovers papyrus fragment that tells us more about women's roles in the early church, because no one cares about that if a married Jesus is on the table. Do you want to hear about a debate in the 2nd and 3rd century? Or do you want to hear that Jesus was married and had children? I know which one sells better.
With that shocking title, The Gospel of Jesus' Wife, the specialist surfed on the worldwide success of the American blockbuster, The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code was still very much in the air. So Karen King, a Harvard professor discovering the secret of Mary Magdalene's marriage to Jesus in real life, is a very, I think, resonant for the media, for the public.
Unsurprisingly, Karen Lee King attracted the wrath of the church. A few days later, an editorial in the Osservatore Romano, the Vatican Daily, ridiculed the discovery. Well prepared for controversy, Karen Lee King does not hesitate to order multiple scientific analyses.
I was very pleased to hear yesterday that Professor King, who is the teacher who's at Harvard who's publishing this text, has the intention of trying to get a chemical analysis of the ink in order to verify whether or not it is really ancient or whether or not it might be a modern composition.
Experts from Columbia and MIT are unanimous. The object is authentic.
It reveals two really interesting things. One, the papyrus fragment is ancient, so it's from between 650 and 870 CE.
No one doubted that. They knew it was papyrus. That was never in doubt.
Two, the ink is very old too. Like, it has the same chemical composition as ancient ink.
Karen King had been vindicated. She had doubters, but now look, here's the evidence. Here's the science. There's no proof of modern forgery.
At last, Karen Lee King seemed cleared of any suspicion. But the scandalous papyrus continued to attract attention.
Now, this doesn't prove that it's real, because forgers are always one step ahead of us.
For many observers, the Gospel of Jesus' Wife is one too many apocryphal Gospels, and the attacks are targeted.
Number one, the Coptic handwriting. After extensive research by many scholars, they could find no comparable handwriting style anywhere in antiquity, not just in the early Christian texts, but anywhere in Coptic manuscript history. The other problem was that the ink on the papyrus looked like it had been applied by a brush. And brushes went out of use in Egypt like 2 centuries before Christ.
The word "my" in "my wife" is in boldface, which is strange, as if it had been designed to draw attention. While Karen King always disputed this, certain sentences in the manuscript seem to be excerpts from another apocryphal gospel, Thomas's. Yet not from the original version of that text, but from a much more modern translation uploaded to the web in 2002.
It was almost if, like, you can remember, like in the old movies where a kidnapper would create a ransom note by snipping, the words out of different magazines to say, leave $1 million for me in a bag, by this park at this time. It was a kind of cut and paste job where someone had seemed to be taking pieces from the Gospel of Thomas and reshuffling it to say something new.
Another element that's curious, to say the least, are the typographical and grammatical errors in the papyrus, identical to those in the modern translation of the Gospel of Thomas.
In other words, the earliest that this fragment could date from would be after the internet.
But things really turned around when a Cambridge University scientific journal denounced a fraud.
When New Testament Studies published an entire edition about the Gospel of Jesus' wife in 2015, I was really thrilled because you had several brilliant scholars writing really clear refutations of the authenticity of the Gospel of Jesus' wife.
The investigative reporter Ariel Sabar, passionate about the mystery surrounding this affair, decided to dig deeper.
And there was one part of it that really bothered me, really from the start, or that intrigued me and I didn't have answers to. And no one else seemed to have answers to, which was that who was this anonymous collector who brought Karen King this papyrus? Who was he?
After a 4-year investigation in the United States, the journalist managed to pick up the trail of the anonymous owner. A scandal-ridden character with a murky past, a certain Walter Fritz.
And so I'm like wondering, well, who is Walter Fritz? I mean, and I realized that he is himself a German expat. He had moved to Florida a few years earlier. But who is he and what's his deal?
Several years earlier, Fritz had studied Copt at the University of Berlin. He abandoned his studies after being accused of plagiarism.
He was accused by one of the other Egyptology professors of plagiarizing one of his ideas. He really started to fit the profile of certainly, I mean, certainly the owner, but possibly the forger of the Gospel of Jesus' wife.
As for the motive of the probable forger, it could have stemmed from personal vengeance.
One of the things Walter Fritz told me in one of my interviews is that if priests could be allowed to marry, they wouldn't have to abuse children. He continued to deny forging the Gospel of Jesus' wife. I didn't forge it. I don't know anything about a forgery. And I asked him, I asked him point blank, I said, okay, you didn't forge it, but if you had wanted to forge it, if you had wanted it, you think you could have? He said, yeah, probably.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife was a fake, and Karen Lee King got burned for wanting too hard to believe in this beautiful story. To be sure, in this area, the slightest discovery stokes passions. Lurking behind the question of Christ's marital status lies a crucial issue for the Church.
One of the central mysteries about Jesus is whether he was a human being or divine. From the perspective of dogma, Jesus is the Savior, the Messiah, sent by God for all of humanity. Can he allow himself to be a human being? If he were human like us, could he have a wife and children? That's the essential question. Can I identify with Jesus or not?
So if Jesus is really married to Mary Magdalene, it means that Christian churches have been hiding from the very beginning something really integral about his identity. Somehow, none of the texts in the New Testament are telling the truth about Jesus, and that calls everything into question. Are they telling the truth about his birth? Are they telling the truth about his death and resurrection? If this is wrong, then maybe everything is wrong. And if the resurrection isn't accurate, then the foundational doctrines of Christianity start to crumble.
Other archaeological discoveries, seeming at first to have little to do with Mary Magdalene and Jesus, brought the subject back to center stage, and they held the whole world breathless. January 2003, at Toronto's Royal Ontario Museum. On this funerary urn, dating from the 1st century AD, an inscription in Judeo-Aramaic fascinated scholars who came from all over the world to admire it. Engraved in the stone are 7 words, meaning James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus.
James, the brother of Jesus, is mentioned all over the New Testament. He's mentioned in the letters of Paul, where he's clearly a sort of antagonist to Paul. He's mentioned in Acts of the Apostles. He's mentioned in our earliest gospel. There's definitely a guy named James who is known as the brother of the Lord. And so he's a real person who was a leader in the community of Jesus' followers after Jesus' death.
That's the first time the name Jesus is engraved that way in a contemporary inscription. So now we know he really existed, and we know he had a brother named James, which had already been mentioned in the New Testament. And here we have confirmation of that, but in fact, it's more complicated.
But once again, the authenticity of the inscription proved controversial. André Lemaire, the first epigraphist to conduct an expert evaluation of the inscription, was convinced for a long time that this did indeed refer to Jesus' brother, before reconsidering.
We have the inscription reading James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. It's not the coincidence concerning the three names which caused me to react as I did, but the mention brother of, which is very rare in ossuaries. My immediate interpretation was that brother of Jesus referred to James, the first name engraved, because that's the usual interpretation in the Bible. However, I've since realized that there is an ambiguity. The mentioned brother of Jesus could refer either to the first person named or the second. The question is, who is Jesus' brother? Is it the James at the beginning of the inscription, or is it Joseph who is the brother of Jesus? In cases like this, it might be Joseph. In other words, the equation no longer works. We're not talking about the same person, and it no longer has anything to do with the New Testament.
Like the subject of Jesus' wife, the story of Christ's brother interests more than scholars. It also excited the curiosity of an Israeli investigative journalist, Simcha Jacobovici. What his investigation revealed would further erode the portrait of Christ as it's been recounted to us for the last 2,000 years. On February 26, 2007, a hint of scandal emerged in the United States. At the New York Public Library, the international press was present for the launch of the documentary, The Lost Tomb of Jesus, produced by the celebrated director of Titanic, James Cameron.
I think literally this is the biggest archaeology story of the century. Now, I've never doubted that there was a historical Jesus, that he walked the earth 2,000 years ago, but the simple fact is that there's never been a shred of physical archaeological evidence to support that fact until right now.
Before Cameron decided to produce him, Simcha Jacobovici, whom we see here, was shooting his own documentary on the existence of Jesus' brother. It was while shooting a scene with Amos Kloner, a distinguished archaeologist, that the reporter made an incredible discovery. An entire family surrounding Jesus.
We were at the Israel Antiquities Authority. It's the old warehouse that they had, and it's like, you know, like Indiana Jones. There's thousands of artifacts. And so that was in the background, and Amos Kloner was in the foreground, and he said, well, there's an ossuary here, and it says Jesus. So, but they're very common, he said. And I look and I see Jesus, son of Joseph, and I said, oh, wow. I didn't realize that. How many did you find? And I thought he would say 100, 300, whatever. And he said, at that time, one. One?
This funerary case comes from an ancient tomb located in Talpiot, southeast of Jerusalem's Old City. When the archaeological site was unearthed by chance in 1980, archaeologists exhumed 10 ossuaries.
And I see Maria. I said, that's from the same tomb? And he goes, yeah. And I kept looking. Joseph, oh my God, they're all here. The whole family's here.
The filmmaker will meet other surprises before he's finished. Another ossuary attracts his attention.
So I said, what does this say? Because it was in Greek. And he said, that just says Mariamene. So when I went back to the office, I had a researcher, and we Googled Mariamene. And a Harvard paper comes up, and it says, the only time in all of Greek literature that this spelling of Mariamene comes up is with Maria Magdalena. That was my eureka moment. I said, okay, we got it all.
The Talpiot tomb is an absolutely fascinating early Jewish site. And it has these ossuaries in there, bone boxes in there, with writing on them. And some of the writing is really exciting.
In fact, on 6 of the ossuaries, names are engraved in Aramaic and Hebrew. One says, Jesus, son of Joseph. Another, Maria. A third, Matthew. A fourth, Jose. The only one written in Greek says, Maria Menumara. And finally, a 6th seems to bear the troubling inscription, Judah, son of Jesus. According to the director, the fact that all these ossuaries were found in the same tomb would prove that this was the final resting place for Christ and his family. For the first time, according to Jacobovici, relics give credence to the assertions of the Gnostic writings.
And then if you look at the Gnostic texts, meaning the Gospels that were not put into the official, they say, Jesus kissed Mary on the lips. I mean, a rabbi doesn't go around kissing women on the lips if he's not married to them. So all the evidence, including the Talpiot tomb, where Mary Magdalene is buried next to Jesus, all the evidence tells the same story. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. So all the evidence, the literature, the Gospels themselves, the archaeology, the historical writings, everything says Jesus was married.
It's clear that when you approach your subject with a bias like that, obviously every archaeological discovery, even the most banal, the tiniest scrap of papyrus with a few letters on it, the slightest little inscription in Aramaic from the 1st century, well, right away you'll try to exploit it to prove your fantasy about Jesus' sentimental life.
To give weight to his assertion, the director called on science. In addition to interviews of experts, he added, for the first time, a series of DNA tests conducted on bone dust gathered from the ossuaries thought to be those of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Okay, you're not gonna believe this.
People are reluctant to think that you could come upon the Jesus family tomb.
The film had great ratings around the world.
It was sort of, the stage was set for kind of a media firestorm. People wanted to hear this story, and they wanted to hear the archaeological evidence for the Da Vinci Code, for the idea that Jesus really had offspring. They wanted something they could touch. They wanted to see inside a tomb.
People just wanted documentaries about Jesus, films about Jesus, books about Jesus. Jesus has always been a big top seller, but he became even more of a bestseller when the millennium came around.
Simcha Jacobovici's revelations fanned the flames of the debate on Jesus' descendants. On one hand, you had a public fascinated with Christ's hidden mysteries. And on the other, scholars denouncing, not without arguments, a media-fueled fraud.
The earliest people that excavated the Talpiot tomb and that wrote about it were very skeptical of the idea that these names had anything to do with the emerging Christian movement. They were pretty sure that these are just other Jewish people with similar names to the ones that we know from the Christian story.
Outside the old city of Jerusalem, especially to the south and east, there are an enormous number of tombs, little like a necropolis. It's a typical situation. Back then, in the 1st century AD, there were thousands of ossuaries in these tombs. All these discoveries let us know what the most common first names were at the time. Jesus, Joseph, Judah, names like that were the top 5 or 6 of the most common first names. So in that respect, these ossuaries are not unusual.
First of all, let's get something clear. All these people say these are common names. All of them are not statisticians. They're not mathematicians. These are archaeologists who probably didn't pass their math test in college. What do they know about common, not common?
Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Yes, today for us, we think right away about the Holy Family. But in fact, for someone who's used to working on Aramaic inscriptions of that period, we see these names every day.
It was difficult for the director's thesis to stand up to an outcry of this magnitude. Even the archaeologist who supervised the discovery of Talpiot, Amos Kloner, called it a mockery.
The name Yeshua, which is Jesus, is coming from Yehoshua, Joshua. Yeshua, Joshua, Yusois, Yosos in Greek is found in at least the name of 71 individuals of the period we are talking about.
Where are they, the 71 Jesuses? Where are they? There's all the inscriptions found are published. Where are they? I didn't see 71. I saw 3. Where are 71 Jesuses? This is made up stories.
According to the director, even if the names Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and Judah were common at the time, they were much less so if gathered in the same tomb. However, critics have pointed out numerous flaws in this logic and even doubt the reliability of the inscriptions on the urns.
Let's start with the problem. We can't really read all of these inscriptions very clearly. So the Jesus inscription has a little X at the beginning, and if that's the Hebrew letter Aleph, then that name is not Jesus at all. It could be a completely different name. Then the supposed Mary Magdalene ossuary, it might say Mary and Mara. And Mara could be a men's name or a woman's name, but if it's a man's name, that would suggest that the Mary in that box is married to Mara, not to someone in another box.
There is no ambiguity about the inscriptions. The ambiguity began only after I said, look, this is Jesus' tomb. It was published in the official publication of the inscriptions. It says Jesus, it says Mariamene, that's what it says.
And another argument joins the list.
There are some other ossuaries with inscriptions that have names on them that have nothing to do with Jesus.
Indeed, Matthew, if we follow the director's viewpoint, is not related to any of the characters in Christ's family circle. But the director is obstinate. To defend his thesis, he goes so far as to use a rather odd analogy.
The analogy that Simcha Jakubowicz uses, he says it's a little bit like finding a tomb in Liverpool in 2,000 years' time that has George, Paul, John, and Ringo in there. And he says, look, this would be the tomb of the Beatles if we found that.
Yes, if 2,000 years from now they find in Liverpool a cemetery and it says Paul in it, maybe it's the Beatle Paul and maybe it's not. But if there's a John next to him, maybe it is the Beatles. If there's a Ringo, then for sure it's the Beatles.
But this tomb is more like something that has got George, Paul, George, Martin, Alan, and Ziggy. It's just not precise enough to be correlated to the Jesus movement.
If the occurrence of these first names is insufficient proof, Simcha Jakubowicz uses another argument that he considers unbeatable. The results of the famous DNA tests conducted on the ossuaries of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
A man and a woman are buried together in a tomb. They're either mother and son, or they are married. And the DNA did not match, which means that probably was the wife.
The trouble is, everything on this matter is subject to controversy.
They don't share any relatives, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were married. She could have been the wife of someone else, since there were 10 ossuaries in the same tomb.
Even today, the discovery of these ossuaries raises questions, and debate about Simcha Jakubowiczi's thesis is ongoing.
He's clearly a very talented filmmaker. He is a PR genius. He really understands sales and publicity. He tells a compelling story. And I haven't spoken to him about this, but I think we can infer from the fact that he only did DNA testing on the Mary Magdalene bones and the Jesus bones, that's the relationship he's interested in. He wants to know about Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Why not test all the bones?
In those two ossuaries, there were actual bone fragments. So that's why we did the DNA. In the other ones, they had been cleaned. If somebody can do a better job, do a better job. So we did DNA. We looked at the statistics. We looked at the epigraphy. We looked at other tombs. We did chemistry. We did all the stuff that we had to do to come to a conclusion that this is the tomb of Jesus. Maybe we're wrong. It's possible. But this tomb has more evidence to it than any other tomb. Nobody studied any other tomb this deeply. Zero. No other tomb. If you walk into the Louvre or the British Museum, every artifact there has less evidence than this tomb.
Simcha Jakubowicz didn't give up. In 2014, in London, with the collaboration this time of the historian Barry Wilson, he promoted the release of his latest book, The Forgotten Gospel, the conclusions of his investigation into a manuscript more than 1,500 years old.
The way of understanding this manuscript is that it was in the ancient world very dangerous to speak of Jesus' family.
This time, the launch was held in the very serious British Library.
Doing the PR launch for that book at the British Library was just a stroke of genius. It sort of lent credibility to this book. Here we are in this remarkable library that holds two of the world's oldest Bibles in its walls, and here we are talking about Jesus and this supposed lost gospel that is also in London.
This mysterious manuscript was in fact well known to researchers. Less so, however, were two letters that would shed new light on the text.
Nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever referenced these two covering letters. And it was a eureka moment. There are very few of those in scholarship, but here was something that really changed our way of thinking about this manuscript.
The names of Jesus and Mary Magdalene are never mentioned. According to the authors, they had been concealed.
And we realized, wait a minute, this book is encoded. It's a code. Joseph is not Joseph, it's Jesus. And Asnat is not Asnat, it's Mary Magdalene. Who said that? The church said that. The church says that Joseph is a prefiguration of Jesus.
The conclusions of their decoding don't end there. It's not one, but two children who would be born of this union. If the text was encoded at the time, it was for one reason only.
So imagine what would happen to an individual if he wanted to say, oh, by the way, the full humanity of Jesus means that he really did have a sexual life, that he was married and he could have had kids. Those are dangerous words to utter. And later years as well, but certainly in his time it would have been life-threatening.
There is no evidence that anyone was reading that text in that way in antiquity. It's clever, it's imaginative, but it's not history.
Recently, a new development has revived the mystery of the Talpiot tomb. In collaboration with Israeli geologist Aryeh Shimron, Simcha Jakubowicz states he's found final proof. It would definitely confirm the presence of Christ's family in this tomb. They claim that Jesus' brother's ossuary also came from the same ancient tomb.
We sampled and analyzed samples from the James ossuary. Then we analyzed samples from the Talpio tomb, especially from the 6 ossuaries which are inscribed with the names of the Jesus family. The James ossuary chemistry fits within the group of Talpio tomb ossuaries. Virtually without exception, I had absolutely no doubt that the James ossuary is from the Talpio tomb. It brings the probability of the Talpio tomb being the tomb of the family of Jesus of Nazareth somewhere up into the upper 90%.
Up until now, no historical discovery has permitted a definitive conclusion as to the existence of a wife and children of Christ. The battle between science and faith is not over.
There's a part of us that would really like for Jesus to be human and to have had a wife and a life like everyone.
In the history of Christianity, and today as well, many believers need a very personal, very human connection with Christ.
Why would we refuse to allow Jesus to have sexual relations? To consider that sexual relations are sinful is an idea imposed by the institution.
Other discoveries, certainly accompanied by controversy, will inevitably emerge.
And so that's why people are drawn to the Mary Magdalene Jesus narrative, because they love the idea that for 2,000 years established Christianity has been wrong.
The mystery of Jesus' family will continue to fascinate us.